A quiet laundromat owner finds a bleeding stranger in her alley and drags him inside to save his life. She peels back a soaked cloth, and the face she reveals is the feared Mafia boss everyone whispered about. He goes pale when she lifts a tiny sewn photo from the handkerchief. The same face linked to her family's worst secret. Now she holds the man who ruined her brother, and a letter that might change everything. Do you turn him in and risk losing the one chance for truth? Or protect a monster who may be the key to washing the past clean? The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Grace like a familiar shawl as she unlocked Clean and Kind's front door at exactly 6:04 a.m. Her keys jingled softly in the quiet morning air, a sound as much a part of her daily rhythm as her own heartbeat. Inside, she moved with practiced efficiency, her fingers finding light switches without searching, bringing the laundromat's rows of machines to life with their steady, comforting hum. The hand-lettered open sign caught the first hint of morning light as she flipped it, her own careful writing declaring welcome to anyone passing by. Grace picked up her worn broom, starting her methodical sweep of the checkerboard linoleum floor, working from the back corner forward, just as she had every morning for the past 5 years. Steam rose from the ancient kettle she set to boil, its dented surface reflecting the gradual brightening of day through the frosted windows. The familiar sense of the laundromat enveloped her. Warm soap, fabric softener, and the metallic tang of the machines. She breathed it in, finding comfort in the clean simplicity of it all. At the counter, Grace paused to straighten a stack of neatly folded towels, each crease aligned with mathematical precision. Her fingers smoothed an invisible wrinkle, a habit born of both professional pride and personal necessity. The methodical work kept her thoughts orderly, her emotions contained. "I'll fly away," hummed softly under her breath as she worked, the old hymn a thread connecting her to Sunday mornings long past. Her hand drifted to the framed photograph on the counter. Tom's smile frozen in time, his eyes crinkling at the corners just as they had the day before he died. 5 years gone, but the ache remained fresh as yesterday's laundry. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 6:30 a.m., and Ellen's familiar footsteps crossed the threshold. Grace smiled, not needing to look up to know her friend would be carrying 2 travel mugs of coffee from the diner across the street. "Morning, sunshine," Ellen called out, setting one mug on the counter. "Thought you might need this more than my early birds do." "You're a saint," Grace replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "How's the morning crowd?" "Oh, same as always. Though I did hear that Martha Jenkins is planning another one of her famous community meetings about the empty storefront on Main." Ellen leaned against the counter, her eyes twinkling. "You know what that means. 3 hours of discussing paint colors?" Grace took a sip of coffee, savoring both the warmth and the moment of normalcy. They chatted as the sun climbed higher, their conversation punctuated by the steady rhythm of washing machines and the occasional ding of a dryer completing its cycle. At 7:15, Grace noticed a white sheet caught by the morning breeze outside the back window. "Someone's laundry made a break for it again," she sighed, grabbing an empty basket. "Be right back." The alley behind Clean and Kind was still cool and shadowed, the morning sun not yet reaching between the buildings. Grace bent to retrieve the wayward sheet, tucking it safely in her basket. That's when she heard it, a low groan, barely audible over the drone of the dryer vents. Her nurse's instincts, dormant but never forgotten, snapped to attention. She followed the sound, moving carefully between the stacked boxes and discarded pallets that lined the alley. Behind the last row of external dryer vents, she found him. A man slumped against the brick wall, one hand pressed to his upper arm, where blood had soaked through his expensive shirt sleeve. A silk handkerchief, once white but now stained crimson, was clutched against what appeared to be a wound. His breathing was labored but steady. Grace set down her basket, her movements automatic as years of emergency room training took over. "Sir, can you hear me? I'm a nurse." She checked his airway first, then moved to assess the bleeding. The man's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. He was well dressed, despite his current state, tailored clothes, polished shoes now scuffed, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. Every instinct told her to call the police, but something held her back. The wound needed immediate attention, and the alley was no place for proper care. "I'm going to help you inside," she said firmly, more to herself than to him. "Can you stand with assistance?" He mumbled something unintelligible, but shifted his weight forward. Grace positioned herself under his uninjured arm, bracing herself to support him. Together, they managed an unsteady journey through the back door and into the laundromat's small break room. She eased him onto the worn couch, her mind already cataloging supplies. First aid kit under the sink, clean towels within reach, phone in her pocket if needed. The handkerchief had slipped in their awkward journey, and she reached to adjust it. That's when she saw his face clearly for the first time. The world tilted sideways. The blood roared in her ears, drowning out the familiar hum of machines. She knew that face, older now, lined with pain and years, but unmistakable. The same face that had torn her family apart, that had haunted her small town's nightmares, that had driven her brother Marcus to. Her hands, always so steady in a crisis, began to shake. The pristine white of her work apron suddenly felt like a mockery. Years of carefully maintained order crumbled like wet paper as she stared at the man before her. "I'm not clean anymore," Grace whispered, the words escaping like a prayer or a curse into the sterile morning air. The light in the back room buzzed harshly as Grace worked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the tremors she couldn't quite control. The injured man, Remo, her mind whispered traitorously, lay unconscious on the narrow cot she kept for late-night inventory sessions. His breathing was shallow but steady. "Focus on the wound," she muttered to herself, falling back on her nursing training. "Everything else can wait." The back room felt impossibly small now, its familiar contents taking on an alien quality. Boxes of detergent lined the metal shelves, their cheerful labels a stark contrast to the gravity of the moment. The old sink dripped steadily, marking time as Grace gathered supplies. The first aid kit from under the sink, clean sheets from the fresh inventory, a basin of warm water. She cut away the blood-soaked sleeve with steady hands, revealing a deep gash along his upper arm. Not life-threatening, her clinical mind assessed, but serious enough to need attention. As she cleaned the wound, memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. A yellowed newspaper clipping she'd saved despite herself, headlines screaming about corruption and violence. Remo's name had been everywhere that summer, 15 years ago. The silk handkerchief lay crumpled on the floor where it had fallen. Grace picked it up, intending to dispose of it, when something caught her eye, a small bulge in one corner, carefully sewn shut. Her fingers found the stitching, and before she could think better of it, she was gently pulling the threads loose. A fragment of a photograph slipped out, worn and creased, but still clear enough to steal her breath. A younger man smiled up at her, his features achingly familiar, the same dark hair, the same gentle eyes she saw in her family albums. Marcus, her brother before everything fell apart. "Why do you have this?" she whispered to the unconscious man, anger and confusion warring in her chest. Her brother had vanished after the scandal, leaving only a brief note. "I'm sorry, I have to make things right." The town had whispered that he'd been involved with Remo's organization somehow, but Marcus had never been that kind of person. Had he? Grace's hands shook as she tore clean sheets into strips for bandages. The methodical work helped steady her racing thoughts. She could call the police. Should call them, really. Remo's presence here couldn't mean anything good, but the photograph burned in her pocket like a hot coal, promising answers to questions she'd carried for 15 years. "Hold still," she murmured as she wrapped the bandages, though Remo hadn't stirred. "This needs to be tight to stop the bleeding." The morning light crept across the floor as she worked, casting long shadows through the small window. The familiar sounds of the laundromat filtered through the door, washers humming, dryers tumbling, the occasional chime of the front bell as early customers arrived. The normalcy felt surreal against the weight of her discovery. Her phone buzzed at 8:15, Ellen's name lighting up the screen. Grace stared at it for 2 rings before answering, forcing lightness into her voice. "Ellen, hi." "Where are you? You missed our second coffee. I've got gossip that won't keep, and your muffin's getting cold." Grace glanced at Remo's unconscious form, at the bloodied cloths in the waste bin, at the photograph she'd placed on the shelf. "I'm sorry. Got caught up with a rush of drop-offs. You know how Monday mornings are." The lie felt thick on her tongue, but Ellen seemed to accept it. "Well, don't work too hard, and Grace, you sound strange. Everything okay?" "Fine," Grace said quickly, too quickly. "Just busy. I'll catch up with you later." She ended the call and leaned against the sink, studying her reflection in the spotted mirror. The same face looked back at her, but something had shifted. The careful order she'd built her life around, the predictable rhythm of the laundromat, her quiet routines, the safe distance she'd kept from the past, was unraveling like a poorly sewn seam. From the cot, Remo stirred slightly, his face tightening with pain. Grace checked his pulse, strong and steady, and adjusted the bandage. Questions crowded her mind. Why was he here? What did the photograph mean? Was this connected to Marcus's disappearance? The service door's lock seemed flimsy now, barely adequate to keep secrets contained. Grace double-checked it anyway, then pulled the shades on the small window. The morning sun tried to peek through the gaps, persistent and revealing. She looked at her watch. 8:30. The day was barely starting, but already it felt endless. Her white apron was spotted with blood now, the stains a visible reminder that nothing would be simple anymore. She took it off and folded it carefully, a habit so ingrained she didn't even think about it. The photograph sat on the shelf, Marcus's frozen smile a challenge and a mystery. Grace picked it up again, studying the details she'd missed before. The background suggested some kind of workshop, tools visible on the wall behind him. He looked happy, at ease, not like someone involved in anything sinister. The washing machines outside continued their steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the chaos in the back room. Grace checked Remo's bandages one more time, then settled into the folding chair beside the cot. She would wait, she decided. Wait for him to wake up. Wait for answers. Wait to see if the truth about her brother would finally come to light. The morning ticked on, marked by the drip of the sink and the distant tumble of dryers, while Grace sat guard over a man she should hate, holding a photograph that suggested her brother's story might be more complicated than she'd ever imagined. Ellen wiped down the diner's front counter, her movement slowing as she noticed the unmarked police car parked across the street. Something wasn't right. The car had been there for 20 minutes, and she knew every regular's vehicle in town. The morning sun glinted off its windshield, making it hard to see inside, but she could make out two figures sitting perfectly still. Through the diner's window, she spotted Tim Mason from the local paper, lingering near Clean and Kind, notebook in hand. He caught her eye and waved, then crossed the street toward the diner. "Morning, Ellen," he said, sliding onto a stool. "Coffee, please." "Say, you hear anything about some kind of incident near Grace's place?" Ellen's hand paused mid-pour. "Incident?" "Got an anonymous tip about something happening in that alley early this morning. Probably nothing, but..." He shrugged, pen hovering over his notepad. Meanwhile, Grace dabbed a cool cloth across Remo's forehead. In the back room, his skin burned with fever, face drawn tight with pain. The morning light filtered through the dusty window, casting shadows across his features that made him look older, more vulnerable than the powerful figure she remembered from newspaper photos. "Marcus," he mumbled, turning his head restlessly. "Clean and Kind. Find him there." His words trailed off into labored breathing. Grace's hands stilled. Why did he know the laundromat's name? How was Marcus connected to all this? Before she could process these questions, the front bell chimed. "Grace?" Ellen's voice carried through the door. "You in here?" Grace quickly locked the back room door and stepped out, forcing a smile. "Ellen, hi, sorry about earlier." Ellen's sharp eyes took in Grace's disheveled appearance. "What's going on? There's cops outside, and Tim's asking questions about..." A patrol car cruised by, slowly. Grace's heart hammered as Officer Peters looked directly at the laundromat. One endless moment passed before the cruiser continued down the street. "I had to help someone earlier," Grace said, the partial truth easier to manage than a complete lie. An older man fainted on the sidewalk. "I called an ambulance, but he refused to go. He's resting in the back room until his family can pick him up." The words felt hollow, but Ellen's concerned expression softened slightly. "You should have called me," Ellen said. "I could have helped." It happened so fast. Grace moved to the lost and found shelf, needing something to do with her hands. She pulled down a familiar stack of clothes, Marcus's old shirts, left behind when he disappeared. The fabric was still soft, worn thin at the elbows. The memory hit her hard. Marcus at 19, laughing as he taught her to change a tire. "Always be prepared, Gracie," he'd said, grease smudged on his cheek. "You never know when you'll need to help someone." He'd been like that, always thinking of others, always ready to lend a hand. How had that same brother gotten mixed up with someone like Remo? She folded the shirts with precise movements, each crease a meditation. The blue cotton work shirt he'd worn to his first job at the hardware store, the faded red flannel from countless fishing trips with their father, the white dress shirt from her wedding where he'd danced with her until midnight. "Those are Marcus's, aren't they?" Ellen's voice was gentle. She knew the whole story, or thought she did. Everyone in town thought they knew why Marcus left. Grace nodded, smoothing a wrinkle. 15 years, and I still can't bring myself to donate them." A muffled thud from the back room made them both turn. Grace's heart skipped. "Maybe I should check on your patient," Ellen offered. "No," Grace said too quickly. "I mean, he's very private. Wouldn't want to embarrass him." She forced a laugh. You know how some older men are about accepting help. Ellen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. Well, I should get back to the diner, but Grace… She paused at the door. You'd tell me if you were in trouble, right? Of course, Grace lied, hating herself for it. Ellen had been her rock since David died, since Marcus left. But this was too dangerous to share. After Ellen left, Grace returned to the back room. Remo had shifted on the cot, one hand clutching the edge of the blanket. His breathing was steadier now, but fever still flushed his cheeks. She checked her watch, 10:45 a.m. The morning wasn't even over, but it felt like days had passed. Outside, she could hear the normal sounds of the laundromat, washers spinning, dryers tumbling, the quiet conversations of customers. The routine continued while the secret grew behind the locked door. Grace sat in the folding chair, Marcus's shirt still in her lap. The photograph from Remo's handkerchief lay on the small table, her brother's smile frozen in time. She touched the image gently, tracing the outline of his face. What happened to you, Marcus? She whispered. What aren't you telling me? The machines hummed their steady rhythm, offering no answers. Through the small window, she watched another patrol car pass by, slower this time. The town was noticing something was wrong, like ripples spreading from a stone dropped in still water. How long could she keep this hidden? She glanced at Remo's sleeping form, then back at the photo. Whatever the connection was between this dangerous man and her lost brother, she was now part of it. The truth she'd waited 15 years to understand was finally within reach. But at what cost? The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the floor. Grace folded the last shirt, her movements automatic after years of practice. Each precise crease felt like a prayer for answers, for understanding, for some way to protect both the truth and the people she loved. The wall clock ticked past noon when Remo stirred on the cot. Grace set aside her mending and leaned forward, watching his eyes flutter open. They were sharp despite the fever, dark and intelligent. Water, he rasped. Grace held a paper cup to his lips, supporting his head. He drank slowly, each swallow measured. When he finished, she set the cup aside and studied his face. You know who I am? She asked, her voice harder than she intended. Remo nodded slightly. Grace Avery, Marcus's sister. The sound of her brother's name in his mouth made her flinch. How do you know Marcus? It's complicated. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Uncomplicated. Grace's hands trembled as she checked his bandages. My brother disappeared 15 years ago because of you. I deserve answers. Remo closed his eyes briefly. I helped him. Helped him? Grace's laugh was bitter. The papers said you ruined him, that he was mixed up in… The papers were wrong. Remo shifted, wincing. I got him out. Gave him a new start. Grace's fingers stilled on the bandage. What do you mean, got him out? He was in danger, not from me. Remo's breathing grew labored. Others wanted to use him. I couldn't let that happen. As Grace adjusted the bandage on his shoulder, her hand brushed something in his jacket pocket. She reached in carefully and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Her name and Marcus's were written on the front in shaky handwriting. For the Averys? What is this? She whispered. Remo's eyes fixed on the envelope. The truth. About Marcus, about everything. He reached for it weakly. But not yet. When I'm stronger, I'll explain. Grace stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. The paper felt fragile between her fingers, like it might crumble if she gripped too hard. All the answers she'd wanted for 15 years might be inside. Why now? She asked. Why carry this around? Been trying. To make things right. Remo's words were growing fainter. Debt to pay. To your family. Grace tucked the envelope into her apron pocket, her hands shaking. Rest, she said softer now. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Remo nodded slightly, his eyes already closing. Within moments, his breathing evened out into sleep. Grace touched the envelope through her apron. The paper crinkled softly, a sound like autumn leaves. She wanted to tear it open, devour whatever secrets it held. But something stopped her. Respect for the weight of 15 years, for the careful way Remo had preserved it, for whatever truth waited inside. The laundromat's familiar sounds filtered through the door. Washers spinning, dryers tumbling, the quiet murmur of afternoon customers. Grace checked Remo's temperature, still feverish but stable. She adjusted his blanket, tucked a fresh, cold compress against his neck. Her fingers kept straying to the envelope. Each touch brought a flutter of hope and dread. What kind of truth could explain 15 years of silence? What answers could possibly heal such an old wound? The wall clock showed 12:45. Grace sat in the folding chair, watching Remo sleep. The envelope felt heavy in her pocket, like it was made of lead instead of paper. Outside, life went on. Washers spinning, customers coming and going, the sun climbing toward afternoon. But in this small back room, time seemed suspended between question and answer, past and future. She thought of Marcus again, not the brother who disappeared, but the one who taught her to ride a bike, who'd snuck her cookies when she was sick, who'd danced at her wedding with such joy. Whatever truth the envelope held, it couldn't change those memories. Remo shifted in his sleep, muttering something unintelligible. Grace adjusted his blanket again, her movements gentle despite everything. The man who might have destroyed her brother's life, or saved it, lay vulnerable before her. The truth he carried had waited 15 years. It could wait a few hours more. She smoothed her apron, feeling the envelope's outline. The afternoon stretched ahead, full of ordinary tasks and extraordinary secrets. Washers to empty, customers to help, wounds to tend. And beneath it all, the weight of unread words, of answers, finally within reach. The clock ticked forward. Grace straightened her shoulders and stood, ready to return to the front of the shop. The envelope stayed in her pocket, its secret safe for now. Whatever truth it held would change everything. But first, there were sheets to fold, customers to serve, and a wounded man to heal. She checked Remo one last time before heading to the door. His breathing was steady, his face relaxed in sleep. The morning's fear had faded, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of duty and curiosity, anger and hope. The envelope crinkled as she moved. Grace resisted the urge to touch it again. Instead, she focused on her next task, the next customer, the next moment. The truth would come in its own time. For now, there were other kinds of healing to attend to. Ellen wiped down the diner's counter for the third time, her ears catching fragments of conversation that floated between booths during the lunch rush. The usual chatter about weather and crops had given way to something darker. "I heard sirens this morning," Pete Miller said, stirring his coffee. The retired mailman leaned closer to his usual lunch companions, right near Clean and Kind. Grace's place? Mary Thompson, who'd taught third grade for 30 years, set down her fork. "But she always runs such a quiet shop." "That's not all," Pete continued. "My nephew works at the hospital. Says they're on alert for someone dangerous." The veterans' table in the corner grew quiet. Tom Baker, still wearing his VFRW cap, cleared his throat. "Could be him. Romano. Word is he's been spotted in 3 counties." "If it's him, he needs the law," someone muttered. "Maybe he's changed," Mary offered softly. "People do sometimes." Ellen kept wiping, her movements mechanical, as she processed each word. The diner's phone rang, making her jump. "Ellen's place," she answered, recognizing Mrs. Donnelly's voice immediately. "Those sirens this morning," Mrs. Donnelly began, without preamble. "Right by Grace's shop. Is she all right?" "Just fine," Ellen lied smoothly. "Nothing to worry about." Back at Clean and Kind, Grace's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She answered each call with the same careful story. "Just helped a tourist who felt faint in the heat. Everything's fine now." Between calls, she focused on practical matters. The back room's original location was too exposed. With careful movements, she helped Remo shift to a more sheltered spot behind stacked supply boxes. She doubled his bandages to prevent any telling stains and drew the room's heavy curtains tight. "Try to rest," she told him, adjusting the makeshift bed. "I'll check on you soon." The laundromat's bell chimed. Tommy Peters, 12 years old and eager to earn pocket money, stood at the counter with his delivery basket. "Got the Wilson's sheets done, Mrs. Avery," he announced proudly. "Thank you, Tommy." Grace counted out his payment, then added an extra quarter. "Would you like a cookie? Just baked them this morning." Tommy's eyes lit up at the chocolate chip treasure. He reached for the locked back room's handle, probably looking for more cookies. "Oh, that's just supplies," Grace said quickly, offering the cookie jar. "Nothing interesting back there." Tommy shrugged, more interested in sweets than locked doors. He left with cookies stuffing his pockets, crisis averted. Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Ellen. "Check Main Street Moments blog. Now." The local blog, run by Sarah Jenkins from the flower shop, usually covered craft fairs and council meetings. Today's post was different. "Breaking news. Unusual activity near Clean and Kind laundromat. Multiple sources report possible connection to recent regional alerts. Updates to follow." Grace's hands shook as she read the comments. "Saw a man in a suit this morning. looked injured. Police car drove by twice. My cousin's friend at the hospital says... The rumors were building like storm clouds, each comment adding another layer of speculation. Grace watched the post share count tick up. 5, 12, 27. She hurried to check on Remo. He slept fitfully, muttering names she didn't recognize. The envelope in her apron seemed heavier with each passing hour. At the diner, Ellen overheard more pieces falling into place. Grace's brother disappeared? What, 15 years ago? Around the time Romano was in the news. Always wondered about that connection. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the laundromat's windows. Grace moved through her tasks, folding sheets, running washers, smiling at customers. But her mind raced with each new ring of the bell. Mrs. Chen dropped off her weekly bundle. Everything okay, Grace? Heard some talk. Just a busy morning, Grace assured her, accepting the laundry with steady hands. The blog post gained traction. Sarah added updates. Sources suggest possible law enforcement. Interest? Historical connection to unsolved cases? Grace's phone buzzed again. Ellen. Coming over after my shift. We need to talk. In the back room, Ramo stirred. Time? He asked hoarsely. Almost 4, Grace told him, checking his bandages. How's the pain? Manageable. His eyes focused on her face. They're talking, aren't they? Grace nodded. Small towns. Word travels. Not safe, he murmured. For any of us. Outside, another police car rolled past, slower this time. Grace watched through the blinds as it turned the corner. Her carefully constructed story felt as fragile as the sheets she folded. The afternoon crowd thinned at Ellen's place. Tom Baker lingered over his coffee. Remember when Marcus vanished? He asked no one in particular. Grace never did tell the whole story. Sometimes stories need time, Ellen said firmly, refreshing his cup. And sometimes they're not ours to tell. But the timeline was building, piece by piece. A tourist's photo of police cars near the laundromat appeared on Facebook. Someone remembered a similar car at the county line. The hospital's alert status remained unchanged. Grace locked the laundromat's front door at 4, turning the sign to closed. She'd never closed early before. Another piece for the puzzle, another detail for the whispers to dissect. In the back room, Remo watched her with knowing eyes. The truth always finds its way out, he said quietly. Yes, Grace agreed, touching the envelope in her pocket. But sometimes we get to choose when. The afternoon light faded. Across the street, Ellen gathered her things, preparing to close the diner. The blog post's comment count reached triple digits. The truth waited in an envelope, while outside, a small town's worth of speculation grew with each passing hour. The black Mercedes prowled down Main Street like a shark in shallow water. Behind its tinted windows, Yanni Costa's dark eyes scanned the quiet storefronts, lingering on Clean and Kind laundromat. Grace noticed the car first. Her hands froze mid-fold, a sheet hanging limp between her fingers. Through the window, she watched the Mercedes park with precise aggression, taking up 2 spaces. Ellen, Grace whispered into her phone. Someone's here. Dark suit, expensive watch. Looks like trouble. I see him, Ellen replied from across the street. Coming your way now. Gianni entered Ellen's place first, the bell's cheerful ring at odds with his presence. He moved with contained menace, each step measured and deliberate. The diner's usual chatter dimmed. Coffee? Ellen approached with her brightest smile. Just made fresh. I'm looking for Michel Remo, Gianni said, voice low and controlled. Heard talk he might be around. Ellen's laugh sounded natural, practiced from years of diffusing tension. News travels fast here. Had some excitement this morning, ambulance and everything. Tourist took ill, I heard. Gianni's fingers drummed once on the counter. Tourist! That's what, Grace said. Ellen poured coffee he hadn't ordered. Sugar? From the laundromat, Grace watched the exchange. Her heart thundered against her ribs as Gianni's gaze swept the diner. Behind her, through the locked door, she heard Remo shift on the cot. The Mercedes presence drew attention. Mrs. Donnelly peered through her curtains. Tom Baker lingered outside the hardware store. Sarah Jenkins probably had her camera ready. Gianni left the untouched coffee and headed toward Clean and Kind. Grace steadied herself, remembering her nurse's training. Calm voice, steady hands, maintain eye contact, but not too long. The bell chimed. Gianni filled the doorway, sunlight catching his silver tie pin, a small dagger. Mrs. Avery. He knew her name. Of course he did. Mind if we talk? Grace folded the sheet with precise corners. Not at all, though I'm closing soon. This won't take long. He approached the counter, each step deliberate. I understand there was some excitement this morning. Oh, yes, Grace smiled, channeling Ellen's easy manner. Poor man nearly fainted right outside. I called an ambulance. Nurse's instinct, you know. 20 years in emergency care, you don't forget. Gianni's eyes narrowed slightly. Which hospital? County General, Grace said smoothly. Though with the construction on Bridge Street, they might have diverted to St. Mary's. His hand settled on the counter, heavy gold ring catching the light. Interesting, because I called both. No admissions matching that description. Grace shrugged, heart racing. Maybe he refused treatment. Some people are stubborn about hospitals. Some people, Gianni agreed softly, are stubborn about many things. He leaned forward. Mrs. Avery, I respect your position in this community, your reputation. It would be unfortunate if that changed. I'm not sure what you mean. Grace met his gaze steadily. If someone has taken something that belongs to me, Gianni said, each word precise, there will be consequences. People will be hurt. Do you understand? I understand you're worried about your friend, Grace replied. But I can only tell you what I know. Gianni straightened, adjusting his cuffs. Keep the number. He placed a business card on the counter. In case you remember anything else. The bell chimed again as Ellen entered, carrying coffee. Thought you might want some, Grace? Oh, excuse me, am I interrupting? Not at all. Gianni's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Avery and I were just finishing. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. That photo on your counter, your husband? Grace's fingers tightened on the sheet. Yes. He had an accident, didn't he? Cars can be so unpredictable. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Gianni left, the Mercedes purring to life. Ellen locked the door behind him. Grace, we need to call the police. We can't. Grace's hands shook as she checked the shutters. If they arrest Remo, we'll never know the truth about Marcus. That man just threatened you, Ellen insisted. Clear as day. I know. Grace pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the Mercedes disappear around the corner. But I need answers more than I need safety right now. She moved to the back room, checking locks and shutters. Remo watched her with fever-bright eyes. Johnny, he said hoarsely. Yes. Grace adjusted his bandage. He's looking for you. He'll be back. I know. Grace touched the envelope in her pocket. But not tonight. Ellen paced the small space. At least let me stay. Safety in numbers. Go home, Grace said firmly. The less involved you are, the better. The sun set slowly, painting Main Street in long shadows. Grace moved through her closing routine, counting till, checking machines, filling soap dispensers. Normal actions in an increasingly abnormal situation. Through the window, she watched Ellen close the diner. Cars passed less frequently now. The evening settled into small-town quiet, but Grace felt the undercurrent of tension. She heard Gianni's car drive away, the sound fading into distance. But his words echoed, people will be hurt. The threat was clear, the choice stark, safety or truth, protection or answers. Grace chose truth. She locked the final door, checked the last shutter, and settled in for a long night of waiting. Grace moved through the quiet laundromat, her steps echoing in the empty space. The washing machines stood silent, their daily chorus of humming and spinning replaced by the soft whisper of an old radio playing classical music. She'd turned it low enough that only Mozart's gentlest notes filtered through. In the back room, Remo stirred on the cot as she entered with a tray. You don't need to feed me, he murmured, but his hands shook as he tried to sit up. Former nurse, remember? It's habit. Grace set down bowls of simple chicken soup and crackers she'd retrieved from her apartment upstairs. The steam rose in the dim light, carrying the scent of rosemary and thyme. Remo's eyes followed her movements. Marcus, he always said you were the steady one. Grace's hands stilled. You knew him well enough for that. I knew many things. Remo winced as he shifted. Some I wish I didn't. She helped him hold the spoon, noticing how his sleeve pulled back to reveal a faded tattoo, an intricate cross with a dagger through it, the same symbol she'd seen in that yellowed newspaper clipping about Marcus's scandal, tucked away in her drawer upstairs. The Salvatore family, Remo said, catching her gaze. That's what you're thinking, the scandal that drove Marcus away. 3 men dead, Grace said quietly. My brother accused of helping cover it up. 4 men, Remo corrected. The 4th was never found. He set down the spoon, soup barely touched. Your brother, he was trying to help someone. A woman, her child. Grace pulled up a chair, heart pounding. What woman? Rita. The name seemed to pain him. My daughter, she needed to disappear. The radio crackled softly, switching to Beethoven. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly illuminating the room through the shutters. I've seen things in this town, Grace said carefully. Families suddenly able to pay medical bills, college tuitions appearing from nowhere, anonymous donations. Remo's lips curved slightly. Guilt is expensive. Does paying for your sins make them disappear? No. He closed his eyes. But it lets some people live. Grace thought of the Martinez family, whose son's cancer treatment had been mysteriously funded. The Williams sisters, who'd received full scholarships after their parents died. Small mercies in a town of long memories. 1994, Remo said suddenly. August, Marcus came to me about Rita. She was in trouble. Wrong man, wrong choices. Your brother helped her vanish before. He trailed off, breathing labored. Grace dabbed his forehead with a cool cloth. Before what? Before blood could be shed. But others, they thought Marcus betrayed them. I couldn't stop what happened next. The scandal, the accusations. I made sure he got away. Remo's voice grew fainter. Found him work out west. Sent money when I could. Some debts can't be repaid, but... You tried? Grace finished. She watched him drift into uneasy sleep, his face softening into something almost gentle. The fearsome Don Remo, who'd terrorized the town for decades, now looked like any other tired old man. Grace settled onto the floor beside the cot, her back against the wall. The radio played softly. Chopin now, a nocturne that reminded her of quiet hospital nights. Through the window she could see stars appearing in the darkening sky. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus, wondering where he was now, what he'd become in the years since she'd last seen him, if he knew Remo had helped him, or if he carried the weight of assumed betrayal all these years. Remo stirred, muttering something in Italian. Grace reached up to adjust his blanket, her nurse's instincts still strong after all these years. Her fingers brushed against the envelope in her pocket, still unopened, still holding whatever truth Remo had meant to share. The laundromat's ancient heating system clicked and hummed. Outside, Main Street settled into its nighttime quiet, distant dog barks, the occasional car, wind rustling through maple trees. Inside, Grace kept her vigil, watching Remo's chest rise and fall, counting breaths like she used to count sheets. She thought about Ellen's warning, about Gianni's threat, about all the years she'd spent hating the man who now lay vulnerable before her, about Marcus, somewhere out there, carrying his own burden of secrets and shame. The radio shifted to Bach, the steady mathematics of his music matching the rhythm of Remo's breathing. Grace checked her watch, 10:15 p.m. The world outside seemed very far away from this small room with its single cot, its sleeping patient, its keeper of secrets. She touched the tattoo on Remo's wrist gently, tracing the symbol that had haunted her family for so long. In sleep, his face showed every year of his age, every weight of his choices. The feared Don, the anonymous benefactor, the father who'd saved his daughter at the cost of others' lives. All these versions of him existed together in this moment of fragile peace. The soup grew cold on the tray. Grace didn't move to take it away. Instead, she sat in the quiet, listening to Bach and breathing in distant cars, watching over this unexpected connection between past and present, between vengeance and mercy. This man who had shaped her family's fate now depended on her mercy. The irony wasn't lost on her, but neither was the humanity of the moment. Just 2 people in a small room, surrounded by the gentle whir of machines and the soft notes of classical music, sharing the weight of old secrets and new truths. Time seemed suspended in the dim light. Grace stayed on the floor, her back against the wall, keeping watch as Remo slept. Whatever tomorrow might bring, Gianni's return, the town's discovery, the full truth about Marcus. For now, there was just this, the quiet of night, the sound of healing breath, and the strange peace of understanding slowly taking root. Grace woke with a crick in her neck, still sitting against the wall beside Remo's cot. The laundromat's familiar hum filled the pre-dawn quiet. She checked her watch. 6:30 a.m. Remo slept deeply, his breathing steady. The envelope felt heavy in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, studying the yellowed paper and Remo's shaky handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she carefully broke the seal. Inside, she found 3 items: a letter, dated 15 years ago, a receipt from Western Union, and a small business card for Mountain View Construction in Colorado. The letter began formally. To the Avery family, by the time you read this, I will likely be gone. What follows is the truth about Marcus Avery and the debt I owe your family. Grace's heart raced as she read on. Remo's words painted a different picture of that terrible night in 1994. Marcus hadn't betrayed anyone. He'd helped Remo's daughter, Rita, escape an abusive relationship with one of Remo's own men. When that man turned up dead, Marcus was framed for murder. Your brother chose mercy over loyalty to our organization, Remo wrote. He saved my daughter's life, knowing it would cost him everything. I could not publicly defend him without revealing Rita's involvement and putting her at risk. Instead, I arranged his escape. The letter detailed how Remo had orchestrated Marcus's disappearance: a midnight drive to the bus station, a job waiting in Colorado, regular anonymous payments to help him start over, all done in secret to protect both Marcus and Rita. I asked that Marcus never know the source of this help, the letter continued. Let him believe he survived on his own strength. It is the least I can do after taking away his good name. Grace's hands shook. For 15 years, she'd believed her brother was a murderer who'd fled justice. The town had whispered about the Avery family's shame. Their mother had died, believing her son was lost to darkness. But here was proof of something else. Not innocence exactly, but a different kind of guilt. A choice made for love and protection, paid for with exile. She glanced at Remo's sleeping form. The feared crime boss had protected her brother while letting him carry the weight of false accusations. A cruel mercy, but mercy nonetheless. The Western Union receipt showed regular payments sent to a John Marcus in Colorado. The last transfer was dated just 6 months ago. Her brother was alive. Grace picked up the business card. Mountain View Construction had a phone number and address in a small town outside Denver. Her hands shook as she dialed the number on her cell phone, stepping into the quiet front room of the laundromat. A sleepy voice answered on the 4th ring. Mountain View. I'm looking for Marcus Avery, Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. Or John Marcus. A long pause. Who's asking? His sister, Grace. Another pause. Hold, please. Grace's heart pounded as music played softly. She glanced back at the room where Remo slept. The morning sun was starting to peek through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Ma'am? A different voice now, older. I'm sorry, but John Marcus no longer works here, left about 3 months ago. But I have a forwarding address for his last check if you'd like it. Grace scrambled for a pen, writing down an address in Montana. A new lead? A new hope? Back in the storage room, she studied Remo's face. In sleep, he looked almost peaceful. Not the fearsome Don who'd ruled their town through intimidation, but an old man carrying his own burdens of guilt and love. The truth was messier than she'd imagined. Marcus wasn't the betrayer she'd believed him to be, but neither was Remo purely the villain. Her brother had chosen mercy over loyalty, and Remo had responded with a complicated mix of punishment and protection. Grace sat at her small desk, reading the letter again. Certain phrases jumped out. I could not save his reputation, but I could save his life. Rita still asks about him sometimes. Some debts can never be repaid, but we try anyway. The morning light grew stronger. Soon, Ellen would arrive for their usual coffee, and Grace would have to decide what to tell her. The town was already buzzing with rumors about Remo's presence. How much more complicated would things become when the truth about Marcus emerged? She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her desk drawer. Through the window, she could see early morning customers arriving with their laundry baskets. The day was beginning, bringing with it new questions and possibilities. The address in Montana felt like a lifeline. After 15 years of silence and shame, she finally had a chance to find her brother, to tell him the truth about that night, to understand the choice he'd made to protect a young woman he barely knew. But first, she had to deal with the man sleeping in her back room, the man who'd orchestrated both Marcus's downfall and his salvation, the man whose presence in her laundromat could either heal old wounds or open new ones. Grace checked Remo's bandages and vital signs, her nurse's training taking over. His fever had broken during the night, and the wound was clean. He stirred slightly at her touch, but didn't wake. The morning sun filled the room now, warming the clean sheets and folded towels. Outside, she could hear the familiar sounds of Main Street coming to life. Car doors slamming, voices calling good morning, the diner's breakfast crowd arriving. The envelope lay empty on her desk, its contents now scattered between her drawer, her pocket, and her racing mind. 15 years of believing one truth, only to have it transformed in a single morning. She touched the business card in her pocket like a talisman. Hope and uncertainty tangled together in her heart. The morning calm shattered at precisely 10:30 a.m. when Gianni's black sedan pulled up outside Clean and Kind. Grace watched through the front window as he stepped out, followed by a hulking man she'd never seen before. Her stomach dropped at the sight of brass knuckles glinting on the thug's meaty fist. "Last chance to do this easy," Gianni called through the locked door. His voice carried that dangerous softness that promised violence. Grace's fingers trembled as she dialed Ellen's number. "They're back," she whispered when her friend answered. "Call the police, now." The first slam against the door made the bell jingle wildly. Grace hurried to the back room where Remo lay sleeping, his breathing still labored. She grabbed the metal pipe she kept behind the detergent boxes and wedged it across the service entrance. Another crash from the front. Glass rattled in its frame. "You're making a mistake," Gianni shouted. "Open up before someone gets hurt." Across the street, customers at Ellen's diner pressed against the windows. Mrs. Peterson from the flower shop stepped outside, phone in hand. Old Mr. Jenkins from the hardware store stood in his doorway, arms crossed. The thug rammed his shoulder into the door again. The lock groaned. Grace's hands shook as she pulled boxes in front of the back entrance. Her nose caught something sharp and chemical. Kerosene. The scent drifted from behind the building where the dumpster sat. "I can smell it," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "You planning to burn down the whole block, Gianni?" A pause in the hammering. "Smart lady, so you know what's coming if you don't hand him over." More townspeople gathered on the sidewalk. Sally from the bookstore, the Weber twins from the garage. Their faces showed a mix of fear and anger. This wasn't their usual quiet morning in Haven Falls. Grace heard sirens in the distance. Her heart pounded as she checked on Remo again. His eyes were open now, alert despite the pain. "Let me go to him," he whispered. "No more violence." "No," Grace said firmly. "We both know what happens if I do." The front door splintered. The thug's massive arm reached through the gap, groping for the lock. Grace grabbed her spray bottle of bleach and aimed it through the opening. The thug jerked back with a curse, rubbing his eyes. 2 police cruisers screamed around the corner. Officer Martinez and Deputy Collins jumped out, hands on their holsters. "Step away from the door," Martinez ordered. "Now!" Gianni turned, all smooth charm. "Just checking on a friend, officers. We heard he might be sick." "By breaking and entering." Martinez's voice was hard. "Step back." The thug wiped his streaming eyes, glaring at Grace through the damaged door. Gianni put a restraining hand on his arm. "Of course, officers. Our concern got the better of us." His smile didn't reach his eyes as he looked at Grace. "We'll check back later." "No, you won't," Collins said. "Clear out of here, or we'll run you in for attempted breaking and entering." Grace watched them retreat to their car. The gathered crowd muttered, some relieved, others worried. Ellen pushed through them with 2 cups of coffee and her determined face. "Let me in, honey," she called. "You shouldn't be alone." Grace unlocked the splintered door with trembling fingers. The bell jingled weakly as Ellen entered. "They'll be back," Ellen said, handing her a coffee. "We need to figure something out." Grace sank into a chair, the adrenaline leaving her shaky. "I know. But what?" They spent the next hour boarding up the broken door while Officer Martinez took statements. The crowd slowly dispersed, though people kept glancing back at Clean and Kind as they walked away. By early afternoon, Grace had canceled her regular pickup service and pulled the blinds. Ellen helped her move Remo to a more secure corner, away from windows. "I'm calling my nephew," Ellen said. "He's got that cabin up north. Maybe—" "No," Grace cut her off. "I won't put anyone else at risk." The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the folded laundry. Grace touched the letter in her pocket. The truth about Marcus that had started all this, a truth that might not matter if Gianni made good on his threats. She checked the back alley again. The kerosene can was gone, but the threat lingered, like its sharp scent in the air. Officer Martinez had promised extra patrols, but they all knew the police could only do so much against men like Gianni. Ellen stayed until closing time, helping with the day's washing despite Grace's protests. As the sun set, Grace locked up alone, checking every window and door twice. In the back room, Remo watched her with knowing eyes. "You can't protect me forever," he said softly. "I can try," Grace answered, but doubt gnawed at her. The laundromat was her sanctuary, her fresh start after losing everything. Now it felt like a trap, with danger pressing in from all sides. She settled into her chair for another sleepless night, the metal pipe close at hand. Outside, a patrol car cruised past, its lights briefly illuminating the room. The temporary peace felt as fragile as the patched-up door. Somewhere in the darkness, Gianni was waiting. And Grace knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that tomorrow would bring another attempt. The laundromat's walls suddenly seemed very thin, its locks inadequate against the violence gathering outside. She touched the letter in her pocket again, thinking of Marcus, of choices and consequences. The truth had cost her brother 15 years of exile. How much would protecting Remo cost her now? The evening sun cast long shadows behind Clean and Kind when Grace first smelled the smoke. She was folding sheets, her hands moving in automatic patterns while Ellen arranged tomorrow's supplies. The acidic scent crept under the back door, faint but unmistakable. "Do you smell that?" Grace asked, her spine stiffening. Before Ellen could answer, the smoke alarm's shriek split the air. Grace dropped the sheet and ran to the back door, yanking it open. Thick, gray smoke billowed from a pile of cardboard boxes stacked against the building's wooden siding. A burning rag lay among them, flames already licking up the weathered boards. "Fire!" Grace shouted. "Ellen, call 911!" Two regular customers, Bob from the hardware store and Maria from the flower shop, rushed to help. Bob grabbed the fire extinguisher while Maria ran for the diner's buckets. "The hose!" Ellen yelled, already dialing. "Use the garden hose!" Grace scrambled to unwind the coiled hose, her hands shaking as smoke stung her eyes. The fire spread faster than seemed possible, eating into the laundromat's outer wall. Bob attacked the base with the extinguisher, but the wind kept fanning the flames higher. Inside, she heard Remo coughing. "No, stay back," she called, but the smoke was seeping through the building. Maria returned with 2 buckets of water, sloshing them onto the burning cardboard. Steam hissed and popped. Grace finally got the hose working, directing a steady stream at the wall while Bob used the last of the extinguisher. Sirens wailed in the distance. Too late, Grace saw movement in the shadows. Dark figures emerged from behind the dumpster, Gianni and 3 men she didn't recognize. "Get back inside!" Ellen shouted, but Grace couldn't leave the hose. The fire still burned, and the wall. A crash from within the laundromat made her spin around. Remo had stumbled out the back door, choking on smoke, barely able to stand. Before Grace could reach him, 2 of Gianni's men darted forward and grabbed his arms. "No!" Grace tried to turn the hose on them, but another man knocked it from her hands. Remo didn't resist. His eyes met Grace's through the smoke, filled with a strange mixture of resignation and relief. "It's all right," he wheezed. "Let it end!" Police cars screamed into the alley, lights painting the smoke red and blue. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. "Hands up, everyone freeze!" The chaos that followed seemed to move in slow motion. Gianni's men were forced to the ground, handcuffed one by one. The fire truck arrived, professionals taking over with their heavy hoses and equipment. And Remo was recognized immediately by the senior officers. "Michelle Remo," Officer Martinez said, reaching for his cuffs. "You're under arrest. There are outstanding warrants." Grace watched numbly as Martinez read Remo his rights. The old man's shoulders slumped, but his face held a hint of peace she hadn't seen before. He didn't struggle as they led him to the police van. Ellen appeared at Grace's side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "The fire's out, structure's mostly okay, mainly smoke damage and some water to clean up. We can fix this." But Grace barely heard her. She was watching Remo through the van's barred window, remembering the letter in her pocket. The truth about Marcus that might never come to light now. Remo caught her eye one last time and nodded slightly, as if to say, "It's better this way." The van's doors closed with a heavy thud. Grace stood in the wet alley, surrounded by the acrid smell of smoke and extinguisher chemicals, watching as they drove away, with the man who held so many answers. Relief and betrayal warred in her chest. Relief that the immediate danger was over, betrayal that fate had stolen her chance to understand everything. Firefighters moved through the laundromat, checking for hot spots. The damage looked worse in the harsh emergency lights. Scorched siding, waterlogged floor, smoke stains on the ceiling. But Ellen was right. It could be repaired. The police led Gianni and his men away in separate cars. Grace noticed with grim satisfaction that the thug who'd tried to break in earlier was sporting fresh handcuffs. Officer Martinez approached her with his notebook open. "We'll need statements from everyone," he said. "And you'll have to explain why you were harboring a known criminal." I was helping an injured man, Grace said firmly. That's all. Martinez's expression softened slightly. We'll sort it out. For now, focus on securing your business. The fire marshal will need to inspect before you can reopen. Grace nodded, too tired to argue. She watched the emergency vehicles slowly depart, leaving the alley in darkness, broken only by the street lamp at its mouth. The night air was finally clear of smoke, but the bitter taste lingered. Ellen squeezed her arm. Come stay with me tonight. We'll start fresh in the morning. Grace touched the letter in her pocket, thinking of Marcus, of Remo, of all the tangled threads of past and present. The truth was still there, waiting to be unraveled, but for now she had a laundromat to save. They locked up what was left of the back door, Grace pausing to look at the scorched wall one last time. In just a few hours, everything had changed, yet somehow, watching the police van disappear into the night, she felt the first stirrings of hope beneath the ashes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but at least the immediate danger had passed. The streetlights flickered as they walked away, casting uncertain shadows across the damaged building. Clean and Kind stood silent in the gathering dark, its windows reflecting the last glimmers of sunset, waiting for morning to reveal what could be salvaged and what had been irretrievably lost. Grace's shoes squeaked on the wet floor as she pushed open the laundromat's front door at 8 sharp. The morning sun, usually cheerful through the frosted windows, only highlighted the destruction. Soot streaked the ceiling in ugly black fingers. The air still held the acrid smell of smoke and chemical extinguisher residue. Oh, Lord, she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty space. Near the back, where the fire had started, a stack of donated quilts from First Baptist lay ruined, wedding ring patterns and double hearts reduced to soggy, smoke-stained masses. Grace touched one gently, remembering Mrs. Peterson and her quilting circle spending months on these. Ellen arrived with coffee and breakfast sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Eat first, she ordered, setting everything on the counter. Then we tackle this mess. Grace's hands shook as she picked up her coffee cup. I need to call Frank at the insurance office. Already did, Ellen said. He's coming at 9. They worked methodically, making lists of damaged items. The industrial washers seemed okay, just needed cleaning. 3 dryers had water damage. The ceiling would need repainting, the back wall replacing. Grace wrote everything down in her neat handwriting, trying to focus on facts instead of feelings. Mr. Thompson and Dr. Walker, 2 town council members, arrived around 9:30. They walked the space with grave faces, conferring in low voices. We can have volunteers here this afternoon, Dr. Walker offered. Start cleaning up at least. And my son's construction crew can look at that back wall, Mr. Thompson added. No charge for the estimate. Grace's throat tightened at their kindness. Thank you, but I'm not sure I deserve... Stop right there, Ellen cut in. You did what any decent person would do. Frank, the insurance agent, arrived with his camera and forms. He photographed everything, making sympathetic noises. Could have been much worse, he said, checking the structure. Mostly superficial damage. Your policy should cover most of it. Grace nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The letter in her pocket felt heavy as lead. She'd read it 3 more times last night, trying to understand Remo's role in Marcus's disappearance. The truth seemed both simpler and more complicated than she'd imagined. Around 10:30, Mr. Harlan came in. The Korean War veteran usually did his laundry on Thursdays, but today he just stood in the doorway, cap in hands. Miss Grace? Got something to tell you. She paused in her cataloging. What is it, Mr. Harlan? He shifted uncomfortably. Back in 2009, when Martha was sick, cancer treatments eating up all our savings, we got this check. Anonymous. Paid for everything. He pulled out his wallet, removed a folded paper. Bank said it came from some investment company, but I always wondered. Then yesterday, hearing about Remo. He handed her the paper. Grace's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The company name matched one mentioned in Remo's letter about Marcus. There's more, Mr. Harlan continued. Thompson's Boys College Fund, the new roof on the community center, all came from the same place. We all thought it was some guardian angel. He cleared his throat. Maybe he was, in his way. Grace sat heavily in her folding chair. The letter in her pocket seemed to burn. How many others had Remo helped? And why? The man she'd tended to, gentle with his thanks, careful with his words, didn't match the monster from old newspaper headlines. Ellen brought her another coffee. You okay? I don't know, Grace admitted. Everything I thought I knew about Marcus leaving, about Remo, it's all twisted up. Then untwist it, Ellen said simply. Find Marcus. Get the whole story. Grace pulled out the letter, smoothing its creases. The address listed for Marcus was years old, but it was a start. The truth about his departure, about Remo's involvement, about everything, it needed to come out. But carefully, slowly, like cleaning a deep wound. More townspeople began dropping by. Mrs. Peterson brought fresh coffee cake and offers to help clean. The hardware store owner arrived with boxes of cleaning supplies. On the house, 2 teenagers from the high school showed up with mops and buckets. Grace watched them all, these people who'd known her forever, who'd whispered about Marcus's scandal, who now might need to reshape their understanding just as she was doing. The truth would change things. But maybe, like the laundromat, what emerged from the ashes would be stronger. She looked around at the damage again, really seeing it. Yes, there was destruction, but also possibility. The machines could be cleaned, the walls repaired, the quilts remade, and maybe, just maybe, old wounds could heal too. The morning light strengthened, casting long rectangles across the sooty floor. Grace pulled out her notebook, started a new list. Steps to finding Marcus. Below that, she wrote, Truth to tell. The weight of the letter in her pocket felt different now. Less like a burden, more like a key. Ellen appeared with more cleaning supplies. Ready to start? Grace nodded, rolling up her sleeves. The physical work would help clear her mind, help her plan her next moves. One thing was certain. She couldn't let Remo's arrest be the end of the story. There was too much left unsaid, too many threads to unravel. Mr. Harlan lingered, helping to move wet boxes. You know, Rory, he said quietly, sometimes the worst things show us who people really are, both the good and the bad. Grace thought of Remo's gentle hands, accepting her care, of his careful words about Marcus, of all these secret kindnesses coming to light. Yes, she said, I'm beginning to understand that. The insurance forms lay on the counter, waiting for her signature. The cleaning supplies stood ready. And somewhere out there, Marcus was living a life Remo had somehow made possible. Grace picked up a mop, took a deep breath of the smoky air, and began. The bell above Ellen's diner door chimed at exactly noon. Grace looked up to see a woman in her 30s, wearing a simple gray blazer, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Rita Romano carried herself with quiet dignity, nothing like the flashy persona Grace had imagined for a crime boss's daughter. Rita slid into the booth across from Grace, her movements careful and measured. Thank you for meeting me, she said softly. Her eyes, so like her father's, held the same mix of wariness and hope Grace had seen in Remo's. Ellen appeared with 2 cups of coffee, giving Grace's shoulder a supportive squeeze before leaving them alone. I have something you should see, Grace said, pulling out Remo's letter. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed it across the table. Rita read it slowly, her composed expression cracking only once, a slight widening of eyes at her father's signature. This matches his handwriting, she confirmed, and the company name. It's one of his legitimate fronts, used for certain payments. Grace produced the receipt she'd found, showing the job arrangement for Marcus. Your father helped him leave town, gave him a fresh start. There's more. Rita reached into her bag and withdrew a manila envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. Marcus, younger and smiling, standing beside Remo at what looked like a construction site. I found this in Dad's study years ago. Never understood why he kept it. They spread the documents across the table, the letter, the receipt, the photo, and several bank statements Rita had brought showing regular payments to various town organizations through shell companies. He was trying to make amends, Rita said quietly. In his own way. Not enough, maybe, but... The diner's door chimed again. Mr. Harlan entered with Reverend Stevens and Mrs. Thompson, the retired school teacher. They approached the booth cautiously. We heard you were gathering evidence, Mr. Harlan said, about the help we received. He placed a yellowed thank you letter on the table, one he'd written to his anonymous benefactor years ago. Mrs. Thompson added her son's college acceptance letter and the canceled check that had paid his first year's tuition. Reverend Stevens contributed documentation of anonymous donations to the church's food bank. Ellen brought more coffee and started arranging the growing pile of papers. I've got contact information for at least 6 other families, she said, all willing to testify about the help they received. Grace watched Rita's face as she examined each piece of evidence. The younger woman's professional demeanor softened slightly. This could help, she said, not to excuse everything, but to show another side. The DA might consider it during sentencing. They spent the next hour organizing the documents chronologically, Ellen brought over her laptop, and they created a spreadsheet tracking dates, amounts, and recipients. The pattern was clear. For years, Remo had been quietly supporting town members in crisis. "We need to be careful how we present this," Rita cautioned. "The DA's office will want verification of every detail. And the press." She frowned. "They could twist it." "What about Sarah Chen at the Herald?" Ellen suggested. "She's fair, thorough, won't sensationalize it." Grace nodded. "I trust her, and she knows the town's history." They made copies of everything, Rita carefully authenticating each document. Mr. Harlan and the others wrote detailed statements about the help they'd received. Grace found herself touched by their willingness to come forward, to speak up for a man many feared. By 3 o'clock, they had assembled 3 identical packets. One for the DA, one for Sarah Chen, and one for Rita's records. The evidence painted a complex picture, not of a saint, but of a man trying to balance his dark past with acts of genuine kindness. "There's something else," Rita said, pulling out her phone. "I found Marcus." Grace's heart stuttered. "What?" "He's in Oregon, works as a carpenter." Rita showed her a social media profile. "Living under the name Mark Andrews. Dad's company still sends him quarterly payments, small ones, just enough to help with health insurance." Grace stared at the tiny photo. Her brother, older but unmistakable, standing proudly in front of a finished cabinet. Her vision blurred with tears. "We should call him," Ellen said gently. "After all this time." "Not yet," Grace decided, wiping her eyes. "Let's get this sorted first. He deserves to know the whole truth when we reach out." They spent the next hour finalizing their approach. Rita would take the evidence to her contact at the DA's office. Ellen would arrange a meeting with Sarah Chen. The townspeople would be ready to give statements when needed. "It won't fix everything," Rita said as they prepared to leave. "But maybe it can help us understand. Help others understand." Grace watched the afternoon light slant through the diner windows, casting long shadows across their carefully assembled evidence. Each piece of paper represented a life touched, a secret kindness, a small attempt at redemption. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen, but at least now the full story would be told. Ellen started boxing up the documents while Rita made calls to set up meetings. Grace sat quietly, touching the photo of Marcus. After 15 years of silence and shame, the truth was finally emerging. Messy, complicated, but real. The diner's regular customers began arriving for the afternoon coffee rush. They nodded respectfully to Rita, offered quiet words of support to Grace. The town was changing, Grace realized. Old judgments giving way to new understanding. Mrs. Thompson paused on her way out. "You know," she said softly, "my boy's a lawyer now, doing good work. Wouldn't have happened without that money. Sometimes help comes from strange places." Grace squeezed her hand, watching as Rita carefully packed the last of their evidence. They had done what they could. Now it was time to let the truth do its work. The county courthouse stood as a modest brick building, its worn wooden benches filled with townsfolk by 8:45 a.m. Grace sat beside Rita in the second row, watching the morning light filter through tall windows. The room smelled of old wood polish and coffee from the bailiff's cup. Ellen slipped in just before 9, squeezing Grace's hand as she took her seat. Mr. Harlan and several other veterans filed in quietly, followed by Reverend Stevens and Mrs. Thompson. They formed a somber wall of support, their presence a testament to the town's complicated relationship with truth and mercy. At 9:05, the bailiff called for order. Judge Martha Wilson entered, her silver hair pulled back severely, her reputation for fairness well known in 3 counties. Grace watched Remo being led in, noting how his shoulders stooped slightly, his usual commanding presence diminished by his injuries and standard-issue jumpsuit. District Attorney Palmer stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, we're here for the arraignment of Michelle Romano on multiple charges, including—" "Just the preliminary matters today," Judge Wilson interrupted, glancing at her papers. "Mr. Romano, do you understand the charges against you?" Remo's voice carried clearly. "Yes, Your Honor." The formal dance began. Charges read, rights explained, procedural questions answered. Grace noticed Rita's hands clenched tightly in her lap as the list of accusations grew longer, decades of alleged crimes laid bare in fluorescent-lit formality. At 9:45, DA Palmer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I've received new information that requires consideration." He lifted the thick packet of evidence Grace and Rita had assembled. Multiple community members have come forward with documented instances of, well, what appears to be a pattern of anonymous restitution. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Wilson raised an eyebrow. Explain. Mr. Romano appears to have used personal funds over many years to support various townspeople in crisis. We have verified records of college tuitions paid, medical bills covered, small businesses saved from bankruptcy. Palmer looked uncomfortable. All done anonymously without recognition or leverage. Mr. Harlan stood slowly, his military bearing still evident. Your Honor, I'd like to speak to this. The judge nodded, and Mr. Harlan described how anonymous help had saved his grandson's life through specialized surgery. Others rose, Mrs. Thompson speaking of her son's education, Reverend Stevens detailing years of food bank support. Grace watched Remo's face as each person spoke. He kept his eyes down, shoulders tense, accepting their words without seeking sympathy. At 10:30, D.A. Palmer proposed an unusual arrangement. Given the complexity of this case and the community's involvement, we're prepared to offer an alternative path. He outlined a restorative justice program, full confession, cooperation with ongoing investigations, and the establishment of a community trust funded by Remo's assets. This would require complete transparency, Palmer emphasized, public admission of past crimes, identification of other actors, and surrender of substantial assets for community benefit. The alternative is traditional prosecution with likely extensive incarceration. Judge Wilson studied Remo. Mr. Romano, do you understand these options? Remo stood slowly, one hand pressed against his healing wound. I do, Your Honor. His voice, though quiet, filled the hushed courtroom. I'd like to speak, if I may. Proceed. For most of my life, I've lived in shadows, made choices that hurt people, created a system that perpetuated pain. He paused, looking around the courtroom. I started trying to fix things in secret, small payments, anonymous help. But that wasn't enough. Hiding good deeds doesn't erase bad ones. Grace saw Rita wipe away a tear as her father continued. I accept the DA's offer. I'll confess everything, help identify others involved, and put my resources toward making amends. His voice strengthened. I can't undo the past, but I can choose a different future, one with truth in the light. Judge Wilson nodded slowly. Very well, we'll set a formal hearing for next week to establish the program's parameters. She turned to D.A. Palmer. I want detailed proposals for the community trust structure and oversight. The proceedings continued with bail discussion. Denied, given flight risk, but with allowances for medical care and legal consultation. Grace noticed how the courtroom's atmosphere had shifted, tension giving way to something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of human possibility. At 11:30, as the judge prepared to adjourn, Rita stood. Your Honor, may I speak? Briefly. I've spent years distancing myself from my father's actions, Rita said. But watching him choose truth now, choose to face consequences, that matters. Not just to me, but to everyone affected by his past choices. The judge considered this, then addressed the courtroom. This case presents unusual challenges. Justice isn't always served by simple punishment. Sometimes it requires more difficult paths. Truth-telling, restoration, community healing. She gathered her papers. We'll reconvene next. Week! Court adjourned. As Remo was led away, he caught Grace's eye. A small nod passed between them, acknowledgement of the strange journey that had brought them here, of wounds both inflicted and tended, of truth's hard mercy. The townspeople filed out slowly, clustering in small groups on the courthouse steps. Ellen organized a quick meeting at the diner to discuss next steps. Rita spoke quietly with Palmer about trust arrangements. Grace sat a moment longer in the emptying courtroom, touching the envelope in her pocket, the one she'd found in Remo's coat, now copied and logged as evidence. Soon she would contact Marcus, share the full story. But for now, she watched morning light paint squares on the wooden floor, thinking about how truth could break and heal in the same moment. Coming? Ellen called from the doorway. Grace stood, smoothing her skirt. Outside, the town waited, ready to begin the hard work of restoration, one step at a time, in the full light of day. The bell above Ellen's diner chimed at 3 o'clock. Grace sat at her usual corner booth, stirring honey into chamomile tea, when she felt the air change. She looked up. Marcus stood in the doorway, sunlight catching silver at his temples. He wore a plain work shirt, sleeves rolled to show forearms marked by years of carpentry. His face carried new lines, but his eyes, their father's eyes, held the same steady warmth she remembered. Gracie, he said softly. The diner fell quiet. Ellen quickly shooed the few afternoon customers to tables far from Grace's corner, then stationed herself protectively by the counter. Marcus approached slowly, as if giving Grace time to turn him away. Instead, she stood, hands trembling slightly. "Sit with me." He slid into the booth across from her. Up close, she could see the careful way he held himself, a man who'd learned to move through the world quietly. "You look well," Grace managed. "So do you." Marcus traced a finger along the table's edge. "Though tired." "It's been quite a week." Ellen appeared with coffee for Marcus, squeezing his shoulder before retreating. The gesture made Grace's throat tight. Ellen had always believed in Marcus. "I've been in Cedar Grove," Marcus said after a moment. "2 states over, small town, good people. There's a furniture workshop there. Custom pieces, restoration work." He smiled faintly. "Fitting, maybe? Fixing broken things?" "The anonymous benefactor," Grace said. "It was Remo." Marcus nodded. "I suspected, eventually. The job offer came through a connection of his, though I didn't know that then. Apartment was paid 6 months in advance, tools provided, everything I needed to start over." "Why didn't you tell me you were safe?" "Shame," he said simply. "I thought disappearing was better for everyone. The Avery name meant something in this town before I—" He stopped, swallowed. "I couldn't bear to see disappointment in your eyes." Grace reached across the table, gripped his work-roughened hand. "I never stopped loving you. I was angry, yes, confused, but you're my brother." "I know that now." Marcus squeezed back. "Time gives perspective. I understand why you couldn't believe me then, about what really happened. The evidence looked bad." "I should have listened harder." "No." Marcus's voice was gentle. "You did what you could with what you knew. I never blamed you, Gracie." They sat quietly, hands linked, as afternoon light slanted through the windows. Ellen refilled their cups without comment. "Tell me about your life there," Grace said finally. Marcus's face softened. "It's good. Simple. I have a small house with a workshop out back. Garden that's mostly weeds." He smiled. "But the tomatoes grow anyway. I restore antiques, build custom pieces. People trust me with their family heirlooms." "Do you have anyone?" "Friends. Good neighbors. But no one special." He studied her face. "What about you, after Tom? The laundromat keeps me busy, though it needs work now after everything. I heard about the fire. I could help with repairs if you want." Grace felt tears threaten. "I'd like that, but only if you're ready. This town, memories here run deep." "I know." Marcus sipped his coffee. "But maybe it's time to face them, create new ones." They talked through the afternoon, sharing simple details of their separated lives. Marcus's first furniture commission, Grace's garden behind the laundromat, the way they both still made their mother's chicken soup recipe. Small truths building bridges across the years. At 5 o'clock, Ellen brought them sandwiches neither had ordered. "On the house," she said firmly, "for family reunions." Marcus touched the plate gently. "Thank you, Ellen, for everything, for watching out for Grace." "Someone had to," Ellen said, but her eyes were kind. "While you were learning to watch out for yourself." They ate slowly, comfortable now, in shared silence. Through the window, Grace watched the town's familiar afternoon routine. Mr. Peterson walking his ancient retriever, kids from the high school drifting toward the ice cream shop, Mrs. Donnelly watering her sidewalk flowers. "The laundromat reopening is next week," Grace said eventually. Could you come?" Marcus considered this, turning his coffee cup slowly. "Yes," he said finally. "Not to stay. Not yet. But I'll come. Help with repairs first, maybe." One step at a time. One step at a time. He smiled, the warm, crooked smile she'd missed for so long. "I have vacation days saved up. Could stay at the motel, see how it feels." "Or the apartment above the laundromat," Grace offered. "It's small, but—" "The motel first," Marcus said gently. "Let's not rush." Grace nodded, understanding. Trust, like wood, needed time to settle into new shapes. They lingered until the dinner crowd began arriving. Standing to leave, Marcus hugged her carefully, as if she might break. Grace held on tight, breathing in sawdust and coffee and the faint memory of their mother's garden. "I'll call tomorrow," Marcus promised. "We'll plan the repairs." Grace watched him walk away, his shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived. Ellen appeared beside her, arm sliding around her waist. "Well," Ellen said. Miracles still happen. They do. Grace touched her teacup, still warm. But they take work, don't they? The best things usually do. Ellen squeezed her shoulder. Come on, I'm sending you home with pie. Outside, the afternoon light turned golden, touching everything with possibility. Grace thought of Marcus's careful hands, Remo's difficult courage, her own slow journey toward understanding. Sometimes healing came in unexpected ways, through unexpected people. She carried Ellen's pie home, walking slowly through streets she'd known all her life, seeing them with new eyes. Day 5 dawned cool and clear. Grace arrived at the laundromat at 6 to find Ellen already organizing volunteers with clipboards and coffee. Mr. Peterson brought his industrial fans, Ellen announced, pointing to the massive equipment, and Sarah from the hardware store donated cleaning supplies. Inside, the acrid smell of smoke lingered. Volunteers moved in practiced groups. Some had helped clean after the flood 3 years ago. Tom Wilson, retired from 40 years of postal service, tested the electrical outlets with tools from his new welding hobby. Learned this trade after retirement, Tom explained, checking connections. Never too old to pick up something useful. 16-year-old Jenny Martinez sorted through damaged linens, her grandmother's sewing lessons evident in how she assessed what could be salvaged. Some of these just need a good wash, she said. Others we can cut into cleaning rags. By noon, the worst of the soot was gone. Marcus arrived with his tools, measuring the damaged shelving unit along the back wall. Day 6 brought the carpenters. Marcus led them, showing the same careful attention he gave to antique furniture. Local painters followed, covering smoke stains with fresh white paint. Rita appeared mid-morning with coffee for everyone. Dad wants to help, she said quietly to Grace, when they let him. The retired postman Tom taught Jenny basic welding on a damaged clothes rack, their heads bent together over spark and metal. Sometimes fixing things teaches you how they work, he told her. Day 7 filled the diner with the smell of Ellen's cooking. She'd organized a spaghetti dinner fundraiser, charging $10 a plate. The tables overflowed with people who'd never stepped foot in Clean and Kind, but understood community need. $312, Ellen counted that night, pleased. Plus Mrs. Donnelly's matching donation. Day 8 brought Remo himself, accompanied by his court-appointed supervisor. His hands shook as he gripped the broom, but his eyes were clear. Start in the corner, Grace suggested gently. Work your way forward. Veterans gathered in the back room with Rita, paperwork spread across the folding table. They drafted the trust's framework, ensuring transparency and fair distribution. It's not just about money, Mr. Harlan said. It's about acknowledging harm and choosing repair. Remo swept carefully, methodically. Each stroke seemed like penance. Day 9, the DA visited personally to review the restorative justice terms. The documents filled a thick folder: confession, restitution, community service hours. Ramo signed each page without hesitation. The trust will be independent, the DA explained, but supervised, transparent. Marcus worked steadily through this meeting, rebuilding the shelving unit. The rhythmic sound of his hammer provided counterpoint to legal terminology. Jenny brought in the first restored quilt, bright colors catching afternoon light. Mrs. Peterson helped me with the binding, she said proudly. Said it's never too late to learn something new. Day 10 marked the trust's official registration. Small grants were immediately issued. New books for the library, repairs to the community center, medical bills paid. Mr. Harlan, the veteran who'd first spoken about receiving help years ago, shook Remo's hand. Takes courage to face mistake, he said. More courage to fix them. Through it all, the laundromat slowly transformed. New paint brightened walls, repaired machines hummed steadily, and fresh curtains filtered sunlight. Marcus's shelving unit stood strong and true, its joints speaking of care and craft. Grace watched Jenny teaching younger children to fold fitted sheets, their laughter echoing. Tom showed his welding work to anyone interested, pride in his new skill evident. Ellen kept everyone fed, her practical love expressed in sandwiches and endless coffee. Rita and Remo sat together during breaks, their conversations stilted but determined. We're learning, Rita told Grace. It's not easy, but we're trying. Marcus worked steadily, his quiet presence a comfort. Sometimes he and Grace just stood together, watching the community move through the space, making it new. Remember when Mom used to hang sheets in the backyard? He asked once. How they'd snap in the wind? Grace nodded. They always smelled like sunshine. The laundromat filled with similar sounds now, the snap of fresh linens, murmur of conversation, Hum of machines running true. New quilts hung along the walls, their patterns speaking of hands working together. Even the light seemed cleaner, touching everything with possibility. Tom installed his repaired clothes rack, Jenny's careful welds holding strong. Good work needs patience, he told her, and sometimes a steady hand beside you. Remo swept each day, his movements gradually becoming more sure. Sometimes he paused to watch children folding or veterans talking, his face soft with something like hope. The Trust's first recipients brought thank you notes, which Ellen posted on a bulletin board. Each card represented a small repair in the communities. Fabric, a stitch holding things together. Marcus's shelving unit became a symbol of sorts. People ran their hands along its smooth surface, admiring the dovetail joints and careful finish. Beautiful work, they'd say, and Marcus would nod, understanding they meant more than wood. Jenny hung the last restored quilt as evening approached on day 10. Its pattern, called New Beginnings, seemed fitting. The colors caught late sunlight, throwing warm shadows across the clean floor. The laundromat hummed with life, machines running, people talking, the sound of work being done well. Grace touched the fresh paint, still amazed at how many hands had helped rebuild. Sometimes things have to break, Ellen said, bringing her tea, before we learn how to fix them right. Through the window, Grace watched her town move past. Children with backpacks, elderly couples walking slowly, young parents pushing strollers, all of them part of this ongoing story of repair. Morning sun touched the fresh painted sign of Clean and Kind, making the gold lettering gleam. Strings of red, white, and blue bunting fluttered in the spring breeze, and potted geraniums lined the sidewalk. The town's 7-piece brass band, positioned near the corner, warmed up with gentle scales. Grace stood on the newly swept steps, her hands smoothing her apron from habit. Marcus beside her, steady and tall. Ellen arranged plates of cookies on a folding table, while Rita adjusted chairs for the elderly. 10 minutes, Ellen called, checking her watch. The crowd grew steadily. Veterans in pressed shirts, mothers with children, teenagers who'd helped paint. Mr. Harlan arrived early, using his cane but standing proud. Remo came last, accompanied by his supervisor. He wore simple work clothes, clean and pressed, his manner humble but dignified. Some faces turned away, others nodded cautiously. He took his place quietly near the back. At precisely 10 a.m., the band began. Amazing Grace, brass notes rising clear in the morning air. The district attorney, Mrs. Chen, stepped forward with a small sheaf of papers. Today marks more than a reopening, she began, her voice carrying easily. It represents our community's choice to pursue restoration over punishment alone. Through honest accountability and practical repair, we demonstrate that justice can heal as well as correct. Grace watched faces in the crowd, some skeptical, others hopeful, all attentive. The morning light caught tears on Rita's cheeks. The new Community Restoration Trust, Mrs. Chen continued, begins with substantial funding for local needs. Initial grants will support medical assistance, educational programs, and small business recovery. This represents our commitment to turning past harm into future good. Ellen squeezed Grace's hand as Remo slowly rose. He moved carefully to face the gathering, his supervisor nearby but unobtrusive. The band fell silent. I stand before you, Remo began, voice low but clear. Not to excuse past actions, but to acknowledge them fully. My choices hurt this community deeply. No amount of money can erase that pain, but I hope practical help might ease some burdens. He knelt, an unexpected gesture that drew murmurs. To those I've harmed, directly or indirectly, I offer my complete apology and my remaining years in service of repair. Mr. Harlan stepped forward first, supported by his cane. We accept your words, he said gravely, and we'll watch your actions. Others moved forward gradually. Mrs. Peterson, whose husband's medical bills had bankrupted her, Tom, whose shop had closed in hard times. Each received Remo's direct apology and news of specific assistance through the trust. The ribbon cutting itself was simple. Grace and Marcus held the scissors together, the blue ribbon falling as the band played the old 100th. People clapped, then began moving inside, where machines hummed welcomingly. Jenny proudly demonstrated the new folding station, explaining to younger children how the restored equipment worked. Tom showed off his welding repairs, now painted fresh white. The veterans gathered near their usual chairs, coffee cups in hand. Rita helped her father distribute trust documentation, everything transparent, every dollar accounted for. The paperwork sat in clear folders on Marcus's new shelving unit, available for anyone to review. Throughout the morning, people brought laundry. Actual washing needed doing, celebration or not. Grace showed a young mother how to use the new soap dispensers, while Ellen distributed coffee and cookies. "Remember when we used to hang sheets in the backyard?" Marcus asked quietly, helping Grace load a washer. "How clean everything smelled." "Like sunshine," Grace smiled. "And Mom's lavender water." The machines hummed steadily, their rhythm familiar and soothing. Children played hide-and-seek between the dryers, while parents folded and talked. The smell of lemon soap and warm cotton filled the air. Near noon, Ellen organized lunch. Sandwiches, lemonade, more cookies. People ate in small groups, conversations flowing more easily now. Even Remo found a quiet corner to share coffee with Rita, their words soft but steady. The afternoon brought more laundry, more stories. Jenny taught younger girls to embroider, while Tom explained basic machine maintenance to interested teenagers. Veterans shared memories of the town's history, good years and hard ones. Grace watched it all from her counter, the easy movement of people through the space, the careful handling of both clothes and conversations. Marcus worked nearby, making small adjustments to his shelving unit, his presence as steady as heartbeat. Later, as shadows lengthened, Grace unfolded a special piece of cloth. The embroidery done by Jenny in the sewing circle read, "Not defined by stains," in elegant blue script. She hung it carefully in the front window. Marcus stood beside her, their reflection faint in the glass. "It's good work," he said, simply squeezing her hand. The afternoon light fell across fresh folded sheets, catching the brass nameplate on the counter. Through the window, Grace could see Ellen's diner filling for dinner, hear children laughing on the corner. Clean didn't mean perfect anymore. It meant honest work and willing hands. It meant facing stains and working through them together. The machines hummed their steady song of renewal, and Grace smiled, knowing some cycles never really end. They just begin again, fresher and wiser. The band played one last hymn as the sun began to set, brass notes floating over the town like a benediction. Inside Clean and Kind, the work continued. Washing, folding, talking, healing. One load at a time, one day at a time, moving forward together.